That was pretty good, you too, wasn't it? Yeah. Thank you. Justice, that's our theme this month, and it's not surprising. It is one of our core values as Unitarian Universalists, and for some of us, it is the value. For some of us, it is our reason for being and our reason for being here. Religious community helps us hold and magnify our values. It reminds us to orient and reorient to them despite what's going on. Religious community reminds us that we are not alone. It comforts us and it helps us find meaning when all seems lost. And all seeming loss, it's a little familiar these days, yes? Our federal government is at war with one of our states and several of our cities. Our troops are engaged in unilateral actions abroad. Business and government elites are slowly being unredacted from evidence collected against a convicted pedophile and sex trafficker whose network infiltrated untouchables, both those personal untouchables and institutions. So surely this is a time to calibrate and recalibrate our bodies toward justice. But how do we do that? The hits just keep coming. We are exhausted and fearful, angry and despairing. And we know here and we know somewhere in our guts that we must speak of justice. But the hard part is how and to what end, because we can name the multitude of wrongs and challenges. We can issue a call to action. We can do all the things to remind ourselves that justice is a struggle, that pulling our tails out from the boulder is a lot of pushing and tugging, and it's very tiring. And so we call out always in the marches and the rallies, what do we want? Justice. When do we want it? Now. We wring our hands. What can we do? How can we fix this? We can sing about the ones who came in the name of love, but who died in a flash of hate, as we just have. We can tell stories of persistence and caring for each other and working together. We can do all of that. Somehow we're talking about justice as the practice of joyful resistance, and in all of that mess and struggle, that huffing and puffing, that pushing and tugging, it doesn't seem real joyful, does it? So for me, at least, maybe for you too, I need to start thinking about this. I need to pull it apart differently. And when I need that, it's often the artists in our world, the painters, the singers, the writers, that bring something different to me because they can see it in just a different way than I can right now. And one of those writers for me, there's another I'll name in a bit, but one is now of blessed memory, Octavia Butler. And for you sci-fi fans, blessings, I was not. I am new to this. If you know Octavia Butler's, you know that this is really not your grandparents' science fiction. It's more accurately called Afrofuturism. In other words, it's not your grandparents' science fiction. And though I am grandparent aged, I didn't partake. And it seems to me that people actually do understand that. One writer described my era of science fiction, that old school time, as PR for the space program, which neither captivated me nor included me, I'll note. But Butler also understands it. She said, women found a certain lack of authenticity in a genre that postulated a universe largely populated by men in which all the power was in male hands and women stayed in their male-defined places. Well, there it says it in just a sentence why this escaped my grasp. But here's the other thing, because what I've learned in my life, what this has come around to me again and again, is that sometimes doors that I have closed, I need to open them because there is wisdom behind them that I now need. Octavia Butler is one of those voices that brings to me great wisdom that I need. If you haven't read some of her books, I encourage you to take a look. I want to share, though, with you this morning, not just what that does, like what her books do and what other similar authors do. Like science fiction reaches into the future, the past, and also the human mind. It reaches out into worlds and into other dimensions, and it helps us see our present with greater acuity. And it projects a very human future that may not be to our liking. It helps us see that. Now, some of you all who are readers of science fiction and have always been, take comfort from these sort of dystopian things. It's like, well, at least we're not that bad. I don't draw comfort because honestly, with the pace and breadth of changes we are witnessing, it is hard to believe for me that there are actually any lines which will never be crossed. I used to think that there were. It is hard to cast any of our current precarities as temporary or reversible. Isn't that what makes the present so frightening? So anxiety-producing, so unsettling? Isn't that what makes it seem so challenging to speak to people who vote differently? Isn't that what makes parenting and grandparenting right now so much harder? Isn't that what makes centering and self-regulating so difficult? You see, when you have value, when you have justice as a value, it is hard these days not to feel the stakes are so much higher than mere politics. And yet, I think, like Butler tells us, it is important to face the trajectory of a more dire future. You see, she shared this in an article in which she wrote that after she had given a talk and she was signing some books, there was a student, this was on a college campus, and a student came up to her to ask her a few questions as she signed. And he asked her, now, do you really believe in all of this terrible future that you write about in your books? She knew that he was referring to the things she wrote about in the parables, which included a time that was marked by drug addiction and illiteracy, the popularity of prisons and the unpopularity of public schools, an increasing gap between the haves and the have-nots, and a panoply of problems caused by climate change. Butler heard his question, and she assured him, I don't make those things up. I just look at what's going on now and forecast 30 years into the future. After these problems have had a chance to marinate for 30 years, I just report on what I see out that far. And the student asked what any of us might have had we been in that conversation, and had we been bold enough or had the strength enough, we might have asked as he did, so what's the answer? What's the answer? And she said, just as quick as you please, there isn't one. So we're doomed? He asked, grinning with the arrogance of youth, or the charmed hope that she might be kidding. She was not. She said, there's no single answer that will solve all of our future problems. There's no magic bullet. Instead, there are thousands of answers at least. You can be one of them if you choose to be. Days later, Butler received the column that the student had written and published in the college newspaper. To her chagrin, it described their conversation and that he had asked if there was an answer to all of the problems that she proposed, and she said no. When Butler reflected on this experience in an article herself sometime later, she wrote, quote, it's sadly easy to reverse meaning. In fact, to tell a lie by offering an accurate but incomplete quote. And it's frustrating, she added, because the one thing that I and my main characters never do when contemplating the future is give up hope. In fact, the very act of trying to look ahead to discern possibilities and offer warnings is itself an act of hope. See, I keep coming back to this story. I keep coming back to this story and Octavia Butler hearing that question. It is as if the fellow is saying, you know, your work is really depressing. So don't leave us there. What's the answer? And she just looks at him and says, there isn't one. There's no magic bullet. Instead, there are thousands of answers. At least you can be one of them if you choose to be. For me, that underscores what we're talking about in this church, which is justice, like everything else, is a practice. Justice is a practice we choose. There's no one answer, but we can choose to be one of the answers. See, we might live in a world that tells us that there is always an answer, that there is a solution, there is a right way, there's a magic bullet, there's some succinct way we can understand things and fix them. We should be able to figure anything out, and we want to believe it. We do want to believe it because we want problems fixed. We want the ship righted. We want justice. We are people who long for fairness. We want all kids to be safe, fed, loved, and have a sense of belonging. We want them and all people to be able to love and be loved and to live into their best becoming. We want effort to matter in this world, and we don't want money and position to be the sole determiners of one's fate. These are true things of us. That underlying sensibility echoes unspoken among us. I think it is what we sense about each other when we say, I love to be with people of a like mind. We're actually saying a like heart. But what if Butler is right and there is no one answer? Because surely we know the deep truth to which she is pointing. The panoply of injustices that overwhelm us, the threats of climate collapse, of authoritarianism. So many things. Surely we know there is no answer. There is no election, midterm or presidential. There is no hero or shero. This mess has been generations in the making. But friends, the good news is, so have we. So have we. You see, there's a theologian by the name of Matthew Fox. He's an excommunicated Episcopal priest. Folks just didn't like how far he drifted. Like Mae West used to say, I used to be Snow White, and then I drifted. So he was an excommunicated Episcopal priest, and he started doing his own research, his own reading. He was his own theologian, and he started something called creation spirituality, and he invites us to actually interrogate why we are here, noting it this way: it has taken 15 billion years to get here. That's scientific fact, he said. We are not just the products of our parents. 60% of our body is hydrogen atoms that go back to the fireball 14 billion years ago. We've been around a long time. And it has been a great birthing process to bring us forward. So, he said, we have to presume there is some reason for being here other than going shopping. We have to probe that reason. What are our talents? What is the pain in the world that speaks to us that we want to respond to? What gifts do we have? Whether material goods or power to influence, what gifts do we have to make a difference? You see, like Butler, Fox urges us to imagine that there are 1,000 answers, maybe even 1,000,000 answers. He invites us to hold the shared responsibility of that and to do our work in what he described as the small work in the great work. The great work of evolving the world, the work of shaping history by raising the future, by parenting the future. One in which we refuse to loosen our grip on what it means to be a human needed by and in need of others, and remain aligned with that vision. What if each of us has a piece of the very answers that are needed just now? What if each of us were convinced that we had some small work that was part of the great work, that we probably will never realize ever even made a difference? What if all that pushing and tugging we actually called out to other people? What if? See, I think it should be freeing, empowering even. But I suspect it lands heavy upon most of us. That uncertainty, that overwhelm, that fear, it is just too much. I can't do it. What happened to that brave little girl with the voice, Christine asked. See, we have internalized the sense that we are small, that to stay safe, we need to go it alone and focus on just living our best life, taking care of our family and friends. But what if this time we are in is actually inviting us to do something bigger by doing the things smaller? What if we are actually being unleashed, as Christine put it? Because that's what activist and organizer Sandelo Diamana puts it. To unleash our sense of possibility that everyday people can do extraordinary things. What are the ways in which we are and have allowed ourselves to believe ourselves to be tethered? So much so that we've stopped even noticing and we're no longer chafing at the leash. See, I think we have bought into this lie because we don't have control. And because we don't have control, we think we have no power. And without power, our default is actually to numb out. We come home exhausted and we turn on a machine to entertain us. And we wake up exhausted and turn on a smaller machine to remind us of how bad it is. Like our story, we're like our story with the elephant that knows and hears those around us who need help, but we're comfortable. Leave us alone. But what Nelson and the other mice remind us is that we are all in this together. We may be small, but together we make a difference. And I get it, right? I get that this is a children's book. And children's books so often anthropomorphize animals to offer us an important lesson that we couldn't hear otherwise. And then we hear it, but because it's animals, we dismiss it as irrelevant. But stay with it. I know our problems are deeper than a tail being laid on. I know that our problems will not be resolved by anyone rolling over a few inches. And yet the point remains. We need to confront our fear, accept our smallness, and call out to each other to make a difference together. Butler challenged us to keep naming the future we see, even though it's difficult. She said, making predictions is one way to give warning when we see ourselves drifting in dangerous directions. Confronting that might help us imagine safer and wiser courses. As she put it, tomorrow is the child of our today. Tomorrow is the child of our today. Through thought and deed, we exert a great deal of influence over this child, even though we can't control it absolutely. That should be familiar. Best to think about it, though. Best to try to shape it into something good. Best to do that for any child, end quote. For me, this way of being, this looking ahead, seeing ourselves as the parents of the future called tomorrow, is a different way of holding justice as a value. It is a place of telling the truth, of owning our hope, of naming what is and what could be. It is a place where there is both struggle and joy. And this too calls to me to have a different imagination. I've been spending a lot of time these days with the words of poet and essayist Ross Gay. If you don't know him, look him up. He's written a book recently called Inciting Joy. Just imagine the temerity of writing a book called Inciting Joy. Not imagine, not experience joy, not follow your bliss, none of that. Incite, notice, urge, live into, find it, spread it. He asks really important questions. Try these on. He says, what happens? What happens if joy is not separate from pain? What if joy and pain are fundamentally tangled up with one another? Or even more to the point, what if joy is not only entangled with pain or suffering or sorrow, but is also what emerges from how we care for each other through those things? What if joy, instead of refuge or relief from heartbreak, is actually what blossoms from us as we help each other carry our heartbreaks? What if? He goes on, what if we allow and expect each other to change? And even more to the point, when we witness the learning, the changing, the grieving, the curiosity, patience, and care and love, what if we make room for and witness and invite each other's unfixing, and so we are unfixing ourselves? What if we join the grieving, or when we join the grieving, what if we do it again and again, making of that soft, mutual, curious, groundless witnessing not only an endeavor, but also a practice? We're talking about practice again. Because when we do these things, he says, when we do these things, we fall apart into one another. We fall into each other. See, I think that's key, and what I really want you to get is this from Ross Gay. The luminous mycelial tethers. The mycelial tethers are the parts of fungi. Yeah? Some of you know that. I know you always know more science than I do, but here we are. The luminous mycelial tethers between us, our fundamental connection to one another. The raft through the sorrow, the holding through the grief. Joy is and reminds us again and again that we belong not to an institution or a party or a state or a market, but to each other, needfully so. We are all the answers. This is the small work in the great work of change. Accepting that this is a dreadful time. Knowing that there is no one answer. Grasping that what we did, that where we are did not happen overnight. Acknowledging that what breaks our heart is in fact what unites us. That joy and sorrow have always been woven fine, as Blake told us. That we belong to each other. That we are each other's harvest. We are each other's business. We are each other's magnitude and bond, as Gwendolyn Brooks told us decades ago. And so together, we must remain predictors and parents of the future, tenders of the present, and healers of the past by doing the small work in the great work. May it be so. Amen.